Thanks so much to all of you for being here on a Sunday afternoon, and thanks to our panelists. I'm going to get right into it. I'll apologize up front. I'm getting over that post-TIFF cold that everyone has, so if my voice is a little Kathleen Turner, apologies. I wanted to kick off our panel by asking each of you, the conversation around diversity has reached a fever pitch in the last couple of years, and so I thought an interesting endpoint to this conversation might be for us to start talking about what the most surprising thing for each of you has been in that conversation about diversity in the last couple of years.
Should I start? Honestly, for me, the most surprising thing is that people still don't get it, and that it's taken them this long to start to think that they're getting it. I mean, look, fundamentally, this idea that you can't sell people of color or women to mass audiences, there's never been any evidence that you can't. It was just assumed that you can't. And then people sort of acted as if that was just fact, right? It was conventional wisdom that was all convention and no wisdom. And we're still there. Someone, I think it was the head of Warner Brothers, was like, the lesson of Crazy Rich Asians is that we should be taking more risks on diverse films. And it's like, maybe the lesson is that it wasn't a risk in the first place. And so it still blows my mind that we need to have these conversations, and people taking lessons from it are taking the wrong lessons.
I mean, I feel like we're all going to kind of echo exactly what you said, but that's the thing that you don't see think pieces written about why a movie starring Matt Damon was a success. And it's even though, lately, I love you, Matt Damon. But I do think it's not under the same microscope. Movies that are kind of predominantly white, cis, heteronormative are not under the same microscope of why, what made it, what's the magic that made it successful. And I think that's the inherent problem, is that we're kind of looking at the wrong movies and writing think pieces perhaps about the wrong things.
Continue. I agree with both of those. What's been surprising about the diversity conversation? I mean, I am glad that we're talking about the fact that these aren't decisions that these people have to make just because it's the right thing to do or good for society or good for representation, all of that, that's true. Now we can finally talk to them. In terms of money, I think that's really good. But it also kind of scares me a little bit. What if, as Emily was saying, I feel like each of these movies have so much pressure on them, and so far it's been really good, it's been proven. But what if, to me it's scary, what if Crazy Rich Asians was not a good movie? Would that have hurt? What if people didn't go see it? Would that have hurt the movement? Would that have hurt diversity? Would that have been a blow against diversity? It's hard to imagine a world where that would not be. So I'm just, hopefully we can get to a place where we can have movies where, each one doesn't have so much pressure to be successful so that a group of people can feel seen,
Okay. I thought what was surprising for me, I think kind of shocking, when I was casting Blockers, this movie I directed, the executives and the producers it almost felt like the results came in on movies that were predominantly white and didn't do well. And so they were like, we have to cast a diverse cast. It cannot be 6 white people. No one will go watch it. And I thought that was a bit of a shock, where it was and I agree with them. I think you just need to cast what our world looks like, and that is a diverse world. And so you cast, you find the ensemble that works best. But I do think in a surprising way, it was we got to be fresh, and how we're fresh is different looking people. And that's the only way that we'll get any kind of attention these days, because there's too much content out there. It just all kind of felt like it was coming from fear. But I think that now, as the more to say what you were saying, because I felt like this with from a gender perspective, with Bridesmaids doing well, and then because I couldn't get Pitch Perfect going, until Bridesmaids, and then it was now it's okay. But if Bridesmaids had not done well, I don't think Pitch Perfect would have ever been made.
You can use their lack of imagination against them, you know?
For sure, yeah.
Like after Lord of the Rings, they were all, because they were like, oh, people like sword and sorcery movies. No, people like good movies.
Exactly.
And so now when there's, sorry.
I think for me, one of the most surprising things was how myopic people's view on diversity can be. In that Black Panther comes out and suddenly we need black stuff. And then Crazy Rich Asians comes out, we need Asian stuff, but that Asia. We just want China. We don't want South Asia. We don't want like East Asia. We just want that thing. I went to go see a movie the other weekend. I won't say what it was, but it had a predator in it. And, and it had an autistic character. And every autistic character I've almost ever seen in a movie also has a superpower, which is autism. I'm like, yeah, but that's not really how that works. If you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism. What if like this kid wasn't also a science whiz? What if this kid didn't know math? What if this kid was autistic? But that's never going to happen because that's a level of diversity Hollywood has yet to find a way to make $1 billion off of. So I just widening your gaze on what can be diversity and then finding a way to include that vision.
It's funny that you say that because I was thinking the same thing. For me, it's not just being diverse with a cast. It's also being diverse or with ethnic backgrounds. It's like there's so many different things that that actors come up against. If you are, handicapped, or if you are transgender, whatever the case is, like everybody should be able to see themselves reflected on the screen or on television or in some way. And I feel like that is, the diversity thing is obviously a movement and everybody is trying to jump on the bandwagon and all that, but there's still so many other hurdles that need to be addressed. And I think that's what's so surprising to me. And not just Crazy Rich Asians. There was also Girls Trip with 4 black women who were hilarious. And it's like, oh, well, let's now make movies about black women that, who knew that they could make all this money in the box office. So it's so surprising on so many different levels. Yeah, that's all I got.
We've just mentioned Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians, which have become kind of like the poster children for diverse filmmaking in the last couple of years. Black Panther has the highest domestic gross of any film this year. Crazy Rich Asians had an unprecedented only 6% drop off from weekend 1 to weekend 2. What do you guys hope that not only these films, but kind of diverse films on the whole, bring to studio executives' attention beyond the financial bottom line, audience reactions, the cultural response? How do you hope that studio executives start to listen to those lessons?
Well, I will say that every freelance black journalist that I know has never been busier than the February and March when Black Panther came out, because suddenly you needed a black person to write about Black Panther, which you don't, but it's not bad that you do. But the conversation we're starting to have about critics from diverse backgrounds, about entertainment journalists from diverse backgrounds who can write on these movies with a sense of where they come from and what it means to this audience and what it gets right, what it gets wrong, is important. And I hope that the fact that there are movies that are targeting certain demographics that inspire editors to find journalists of those demographics don't then forget who those journalists were and don't decide that suddenly, oh, well, there's no black movies out this year, we don't need to hire those people anymore. It's no, part of this conversation, the reason why this conversation is taking off so well is because the people writing about it feel it in a way that some journalists just don't. And we're all better off for having a more diverse conversation about movies, whether those movies are diverse or not.
Yeah, on the subject of critics, Stacey Smith at the Annenberg Inclusion Initiative has done amazing work looking at the utter lack of inclusion in the sort of critical community and what the consequences are for films, both films that sort of don't have a sort of diverse point of view, but also the ones that do. And the evidence, as you might imagine, there are very few critics who are not white men. White men tend to rate movies about and by white men as better than movies that are not about that community. We're all in this room smart enough to realize what the consequences are in terms of the sort of ripple effect, which is if those movies are undervalued by critics, the people who are involved in making them get undervalued in making their next film, which makes it less likely that they get their films made, and so on and so forth. And we're all, the lack of inclusion and diversity, I think, in the industry as a whole is a consequence of those failures at every level. And we're being denied good movies as a consequence of it. That's my fundamental beef with this. There are a bunch of great movies about points of view that I have not been able to be privy to, that have been stolen from all of us, and I want them because on Friday night when I don't want to leave the house, I want good things that I can watch on my TV, like period, and we should all have that.
Just to follow up on Stacey Smith's research, if you guys have not checked that out, she's at USC, she's amazing. The most recent research she published was that of the top 100 grossing films of 2017, 64% of all reviews came from white men. So, the critical piece is really valid when we're having this conversation as well.
I also have realized now, I've been sort of going back and watching like classic movies that really influenced, movies after them, current cinema, and I'm seeing, for the first time, I'm realizing how much of what is considered good cinema is from the perspective of straight white dudes. And these are really good films, and I mean, like, I'm not gonna name them, but these are like big films that are the most influential films of, the last few decades, and they all come from a very straight white male perspective. So, as Franklin was saying, I'm excited to see movies that people who are influenced by movies that are not from that perspective and see what they'll make.
The other thing I'd add about this, and this is the thing that has been stressing me out more and more over the last, let's say, 22 months, since November 2016.
What happened?
Like November 8th, November 9th?
Yeah, what
What are we
happened?
Roughly
talking?
November
What
8th.
happened?
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit before
Like
that.
pretty
but
late November 8th?
Like in the
Confused.
middle of the day on that
Yeah, what-
day?
what day?
Closer to 7
morning was
p.m.
kind of
Pacific
okay.
time.
Yeah.
7
Yeah.
p.m. Pacific
Like
time.
post-Florida.
Yeah.
that day.
I remember
Yeah.
where I was.
The Florida early returns came in, and I was like, uh-oh. But look, it is not a coincidence to me, and I wrote about this a little bit earlier this year, but it's not a coincidence to me that, let me put it this way. As a percentage matter, there are more women in Trump's cabinet than there are that have directed major studio movies over the last decade.
Cool.
There are more people of color as a percentage matter, thank you, Ben Carson and Elaine Chao, in Trump's cabinet than there are people of color who've directed a major studio movie in the last 10 years. It is not surprising to me that in a world where people are chanting build the wall, that in the rare occasion that there are Latino immigrants on television, 50% of them are shown engaged in criminal activity. It is not surprising to me that we have a world where people are doubting Christine Blasey Ford's story or saying, haven't all 17-year-old boys done that? When everything that we think of in terms of how men and women engage in them, like with each other in the popular culture has been authored by white upper middle class men who went to schools like Georgetown Prep.
You better come on and preach this Sunday.
But the reality is that movies and television define our cultural and social norms, and those norms have been defined by a very narrow sliver of the population, and the consequences are played out in our everyday lives, in our politics, and I think Hollywood likes to sort of pat itself on the back as being super progressive and on the leading edge of addressing all of these issues, but in many ways, we're further retrograde than the rest of the country and really responsible for the retrograde nature of how the country interacts with groups that aren't white, upper middle class, straight, cis men. And that's the thing that scares me most, is that we have sort of failed in our responsibility to represent the world as it is, and as a consequence, the world becomes less representative of the way it actually is in the way that we live our lives when we leave this sort of rough 40-mile radius that is Los Angeles.
Kind of following up on that line of thinking, we're dancing around this idea of the studio gatekeepers, the kind of powers that be, those elusive powers that be in the industry. Have you guys noticed a change in your conversations with kind of those powers that be in the last couple of years as this conversation around diversity has become more intense?
I would say, I'm sorry, I don't. No, I would definitely say that it has changed. Obviously, the studios that I work for, everyone has a diversity panel or some sort of diversity committee or some sort of diversity something at every major studio because they all want to be a part of it, or a diversity showcase, actor showcase, or whatever that is. There's so many of those things that I think is changing, and they're also changing the way their programming is. I notice now that with the mergers between Fox or with Disney acquiring Fox, and also I think it's Warner Brothers and AT&T. There's something going on there. They're exploring the diversity platform and programming that is going to come out on, the new media platform and all that entails. And they're looking for groups, these young group of people that have their sort of finger on the pulse and what's going on culturally, so they can now be a part of that. I think that it's changing in that way, or at least I'm hearing conversations. I don't know. I think everybody's in the middle of it right now, so it hasn't really, nothing has come to fruition. But I think there's talks about it, and it definitely will happen.
Sorry, go ahead. I just was talking to my agent recently about something, and he was like, it'd be really cool to have a woman of color as the lead of this movie. And I was like, who are you, and what did you do to my agent? That's great. People are thinking about it in way, people who had not been thinking about it are now thinking about it, because I think they feel like they're being held accountable for it, which is great.
Yeah, and echoing that, I just feel like they're being forced to, actually. Even if it's like a little bit against their will, they're really being forced to do it. And I sort of feel like I'm one of the the small percentage of women who direct studio movies, and I don't think I would have ever been in that position had I not had like white dude allies. At both the studio that I was at Universal, which they were great, and then also the producers at Point Grey. And so because they're huddling together and going, we need to go seek and find people of talent that are diverse, and start bringing those stories to the forefront. And I just want to add that it's all about lists. Like the studio has a list, and like casting agents, you have a list of people of who greenlights and who doesn't. And the goal is to expand the list. So I do think it is changing. I think like certainly you guys with your movie, it was amazing. Like it's expanding the list. But then I also think that they kind of pull back too. You have to be on them every second of every moment, because then they'll tighten it up and they'll shorten it again, or they'll decide, the gatekeepers will decide who's suddenly not on the list now, and they should be, and those lists should be crazy long.
But even to speak further to that, it's like you said, you're part of the small percentage of women who directed major studio movies. When I think about, and you and I were just having this conversation back in that, I would say green room, but I guess green room. Anyway, we were just talking about how filmmakers, black filmmakers, for instance, when I worked on Precious, I think when that movie came out, they didn't know how to market that movie. They didn't know who was going to go see a movie about an overweight black girl who was being molested by her father and sexually and emotionally abused by her mother who had AIDS. I mean, it was just enough already. But who, you know what I mean? But who would go see it? And they didn't think that movie was going to have the success that it did. And it did. But even after that, Lee, who just happens to be my brother, had trouble raising money for his films after that, and continues to still have trouble raising money for films. And after his proven success rate, when with that, and then you have 30 producers on The Butler, because they didn't have the money and the studio wouldn't back it. And then that shows a success. And then after that, it's there could only be one guy, right now I think Coogler is the guy, and listen, I'm here for all his black boy joy. I love it. But I feel like it shouldn't just be him. It was who was the other one? F. Gary Gray. It was him. And it's just why does it have to be just one?
Yeah.
We have so many friends who pitch a TV show at a network, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, we already have a black show.
They
we
literally
already
say we already have a black show.
we already have a Latino show," which is, it's absurd that they feel okay saying that. Mm-hmm. And these are big, major. These are networks that you're begging to please let me work with you, and the response is, we already have a show like this. Well, they're also these are not considered these are big major networks who want to be seen as being very woke.
I think the operative word in your response, Leah, was they.
Yeah.
And like, who is that they? Because they don't look like this stage
Right.
is the real. And I think that's why they don't know that a movie like Pressure can be successful. That's why they don't know that a movie like The Butler is going to be successful. That's why when Black Panther came out, the chatter on film Twitter was, do we think it'll make $100 million opening weekend?
Right.
Like literally on the Friday night where there's photos, everyone's taking photos at the movie, like literally like it was like a barbecue at the ArcLight at 7 p.m. They're like, I don't know if it'll make $100 million. And my whole thing is like, on a movie that's not about white men, always take the over on the projections. And I've never been wrong, like literally never been wrong about this, because there's an underestimation in the value of things that aren't from that perspective. And it's because everyone that has the power to make those decisions, with literally, I can count them on one hand, are white upper middle class men. And I think until that changes, I think we're gonna have a problem. Like it's a very long time ago, there was this assumption that black people weren't good at professional sports. Maybe hard to believe now. No, but it wasn't that, and initially it was, white people let's take basketball as an example. White people are just better at basketball. And then it wasn't, black athletes they're more athletic, but they can't handle the game at that level because it's more intellectual. And I mean, this is in the 40s and 50s, but that was the justification for not having black athletes. And then it was, well, people aren't going to show up to watch black athletes play. And this is roughly sort of what we're seeing in the film world, in the television world. It's like, oh, well, it's not that we don't think they have the talent, but our audiences aren't interested in seeing it. And then eventually teams like Texas Western, you said, we're going to give it a shot. And they win the national championship like in their first year. And everyone's like, oh, we got to get some black players on our team. And then it starts to shift, because if you can't do that, you can't be competitive. And I think that that's going to start to be what the case is. And my sort of public thing is like, listen, if you don't get diversity and inclusion, if you don't get equity, please make as many non-inclusive decisions as you can as fast as possible, so you will either lose your job or run your company into the ground, and people that do get it can replace you. And I don't know we have another option, but I'm certainly looking forward to those changes happening, because if you keep doing what has always been done, like your business is going to be terrible.
Yeah.
It is also kind of amazing that movies and TV are almost the only disposable income that we don't know how to sell to black people. Like, you can sell music to everybody. You can sell black music to everybody. You can sell food to black people. You know how to market everything using black people to everybody, and they buy it. Except for apparently movies, which is like, what? I don't know how to get them to watch a thing. Like you get them to buy sneakers, guys. Like you get them to buy music. Like you get them to buy McDonald's. You've spent billions of dollars learning how to market black things to white people. Just learn the lesson that everybody else seems to have learned, but you seem willfully resistant to getting on board.
I'll add one more note on that. I was in Shanghai earlier this year, and I was walking back to my hotel late at night, and there was a billboard for the iPhone, and it's all those photo ads that you were seeing sort of earlier this year, and the photo that Apple had chosen to advertise on a billboard in Shanghai was a dark-skinned black woman. Apple has figured out that to make money in China, that is the image they want to associate themselves with. Apple, the world's first trillion-dollar company, but the industry is still saying, do Chinese people want to see black faces? Like, again, I'm going to bet on Apple's point of view over the industry's, but that is the refrain that you will always hear. We'd love to greenlight that movie with the black lead, but we can't really sell that abroad.
I think that's why you have more and more people of color creating their own content. Nobody is waiting for anybody to do it. They're doing it themselves, and they're putting it out themselves. They're trying to figure out a way to get it out there. And here's the thing. If one of these bigger companies come along and they want to jump on the bandwagon, that's fine, but I always encourage people, don't wait. Just do your own thing, do that instead of waiting for who you think is the one that's supposed to validate your worth.
On that same note, as we think about how streaming has changed the landscape entirely for how we view and consume content, you have things like Nanette and To All the Boys I've Ever Loved Before that have become phenomenons simply by being on streaming, whereas if those had been given a traditional release, they may not have gained the same traction. How do you guys kind of see streaming changing the industry, particularly in terms of diverse content, into the next decade?
I'm working on a project right now where this is like a thing that I can tell you that studios are afraid. Like streaming is changing it for them quite a bit because you can be at home and watch a movie and not have to go out and see a movie. It can't. I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, if they felt like that was a good script and they had a good cast or whatever, that they might make the movie. But now I think that they're going, oh my gosh, it can't just be kind of good in their eyes. They have to like have an event that brings people out to see it. So with that in mind, I've been given a directive to have a diverse cast and in this project that I'm working on, and that is important to them, and that is what they feel like is going to be the difference.
But it also feels like it's kind of the same thing of like they're taking, when you do something for streaming, I feel like they're taking more risks because there's not the overhead of like having to promote it, put it in theaters, and do all that stuff. So it's interesting how they're influencing each other, because a movie like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I don't know what would have happened if it was in theaters, but now, because it was a lower risk, hopefully, and it's been so huge, that hopefully that will be the lesson that gets then to you, okay, now making this thing that will go in theaters, it's got to look more like this thing. So and my hope is that streaming is kind of where we're like workshopping stuff and seeing what people actually like, and hopefully it will then translate into what people will go to the theaters for.
But to get back to what we were originally talking about with critics, Rotten Tomatoes, it appears, and I don't have any statistical evidence of this, I don't do that in my spare time, but the movies that go on streaming are less ridiculed maybe, or like the critiques seem to be a little bit softer, but the ones that are like massive studio releases, and people are really following Rotten Tomatoes, like they're really following those scores, and definitely in comedy, we're just seeing that they're absolutely influenced by that, whether or not it's worth it to go see that movie. So that's also like another thing that like is kind of like freaking everybody out a little bit on the studio side.
Well, that's the fascinating thing about streaming to me, is that the overcome to sort of explore a piece of material is just a lot lower, right? Like I remember when Bright came out, right? I don't even think it's a double digit on Rotten Tomato, or it's not a double digit on Metacritic. It's a low scoring movie on all critical evaluations. But like, I definitely would never have left my home to watch it in the theater, but I remember I was jet lagged in London and I was like, well, let me check it out. And I think that's true for a lot of stuff. So you're less critic sensitive, I think, for that.
It seems like the bar, it's perceived to be lower. I don't think that's accurate, though, because people like what they like, and it's not like... I think the interesting thing about streaming has been entertainment is changing, and it's changing that, it used to be TV shows were for... Every show is supposed to be for everyone. And now with streaming and the way we've seen, it's gotten really splintered. Entertainment has gotten really splintered, and there's a sense like, if you can find your little audience for it, then it's successful, whereas... With the movie in theaters, there's this perception that every movie has to be for everyone. And then there's a fallacy that black movies are for black people and Asian movies are for Asian people, when really I think people genuinely do want to see movies from everybody's perspective. So I think weirdly, streaming is influencing mainstream sort of Hollywood movies by showing like, hey, these... we made a movie starring an Asian lead, and only Asian people are going to watch it, and then you see that, and that'll be enough for us, but you see that everybody watches it. And so Hollywood is learning, I think, or hopefully learning that just people don't just want to see themselves on screen. People want to see other people's perspectives, and also maybe people are a little tired of just seeing white people in movies.
And there's almost 500 scripted TV shows available somewhere, streaming, broadcast, online, whatever it is. Somebody's got to make those shows. And it used to be that if you wanted to get a show on ABC or CBS, you needed like some venerable old white dude to be your showrunner, because they trusted that guy, because that guy was going to be the grown-up in the room to make sure you didn't fuck up our show. Now, if you got to make 500 shows, kind of everybody gets a chance to make one. If your idea is good, they're not going to bounce you because you don't look quite like them. If you've got a great idea, and if you can sell them in the room and bring your big boy confidence, you might have a show in a world you might not have had a show 10 years ago. And we're starting to see way more voices getting a chance to tell their stories in a world in which you never would have 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, like a show like Atlanta, I could not see existing at another time, because it's so many risks.
Yeah.
And
Maybe not sheen, but it's, I think because of the people that identify with it, that's the success of that show.
Yeah.
There's so many people that I think that's, for me anyway, when I look at it, I was just like, yes, come through with the guy in the prison waiting room and the crazy guy talking to him. You know what I mean? Like, that's real life stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry, did I screw everything up?
but you know what I mean? I think that that's why I think that it could have been successful at an earlier time.
Yeah.
I just don't think that they took the chance.
they
for
would
that.
not have taken
Right.
the chance, right? Because that would have been the gatekeeper, the guy in the room, the grown-up who's like, we don't really do that kind of
His
thing.
name would have been Sid, because his name is always Sid. And Sid never sees your show, black person. His name is Sid.
Fucking Sid.
Sid worked so much.
But the funny thing is, though, is like I think about. So I grew up an hour and a half south of Atlanta. Like that show is targeted basically at me. Like if you were making a show, that's it. But so my college roommate, who's a Russian immigrant, like from Moscow, moved here when he was 12 years old, is like obsessed with Atlanta, is obsessed with Insecure. Like I think it is. It's like we just want to see good stuff.
Yeah.
Period. It doesn't matter where it comes from. If it's targeted at us, great. If it is completely foreign from our reality, also great. I mean, look, the most popular movie in the history of box office is about a race of people that are blue, right? Like, if you can sell that, you should be able to sell colors that are more familiar to everybody.
You know, even with shows like Insecure and Atlanta that have become both cultural phenomenons and critical darlings, the New York Times recently reported that only about 14% of all writers in the 2016-2017 season were diverse. In that piece, which you guys should all check out, a writer for Crazy Ex-Girlfriends, Sona Patel, noted that she still feels like diverse writers feel like check boxes within a writer's room. What are some strategies you guys think that we can kind of use to move beyond this idea of tokenism when it comes to diversity, this idea that, you know, like we were mentioning, it's like, oh, well, we have one black movie, that's good enough. What would you guys like to see change in that way?
I just think numbers. I think I have several friends I have a friend who is a black lesbian in a room, and she's like, I am so busy in this room because I have to represent black people and the queer community at the same time. And she's like, I don't even get to write jokes. I don't even get to do the thing that I'm good at because I'm so busy representing two large groups of people that deserve to be represented, but that we just need numbers. I literally just think it's a numbers game. I think the more people you get in, the more diverse perspectives you get in, the more interesting conversations you have, and the better TV comes out of it. But just putting one person in a room, checking a box, and then turning to them, well, what would blank do, which happens all the time, is not ultimately, I don't think, helping. I think it's setting everyone up for failure. It's just a numbers game.
Yeah, and the numbers go with with being showrunners, the amount of showrunners. I still think, and definitely in broadcast, that the diverse showrunners is very, very low. I know when I was a showrunner of my show Girl Boss, like I was actively seeking, reading everything, hundreds of scripts, to make sure that my room was diverse. And I had a really diverse room. I actually had more women than men in the room, which is a crazy rare thing to have on a television writer's room. But I had to actively, like when we were looking for a director for the show, I got a list of 30 plus names, and there wasn't one woman on the list. And I went back to my agents and I was like, this is unacceptable. Like here we've got this show about a woman, and I'm the creator of it, and blah, blah, blah. And you don't give me one woman. Like, it's about seeking. So we have to get on these 500 shows now that exist at one time. There has to be more diverse people in power. And then those people are then seeking diverse voices and stuff like that. It's a shame. It is an absolute shame when you think there's just this one person that fits the bill.
Yeah, in every room every writer's room I've been in, I've been the one black man in that room. In some cases, the one black person in the room. In my current room, there's a black lady, and yay, we get a black lady. But some of it is because diversity programs, while they're awesome, their job is to get you in as a baby writer on a TV show, first rung. And that salary is paid for by the studio. And so it's free. Like, they bring you on board the show, and you're there as an additive. You're there as sometimes treated as a bit of a fifth wheel. Sometimes you're invited to be a part of the process. But the second season, does that person get promoted? Well, now you actually cost the show something. Yeah. Now it's actually, oh, well, listen, my agent's got a nephew that would really love to be on this show, or I've heard of a dude on another show and I'd like to bring him in as a co-producer, or whatever that is. And that person doesn't get the bump. That person doesn't get to learn how to be better at their job. That person doesn't get to rise the ladder to eventually welcome more diverse voices in. And that is the sort of kind of paved over sin of diversity programs, which, yeah, it's great that every studio has them. It's bad that few of them do what they're supposed to do, which is introduce and keep voices in the process.
And I just want to tell a quick story about at 30 Rock. They needed to, I felt like I was like the diverse hire in that I was like, there was me and another woman, and Tina Fey was the head writer of that and the creator of the show. But there was just us two ladies and then Tina, and they would all be dudes. And then they had to hire a diversity hire. So I believe that they, like David Miner went to UCB and saw Donald Glover. And it's like that program got you Donald Glover, which then creates Atlanta, which, and it's just like without it, but they had to be forced to like go find somebody. And the person they found was Donald Glover. Like, isn't that crazy?
Like when the showrunner of a CBS show that stars a Latino guy says, well, I don't think we have any Latino writers. They're really hard to find. Every Latino writer I knew was like, we're right here. Man, and we all know each other. And you can list them off. Like, I know a bunch of them. They can tell you a bunch more. But if your network is the same network you've always had, if the people you know look just like you and are never going to broaden their gaze, then you're just going to get a Jay Hernandez saying lines that would never be said by somebody like Jay Hernandez, because, I'm sorry, did I out the show?
And that's the thing. That's you don't want to just hire different voices to check things off a list. It makes for a better show. The different perspectives make for better stories. Yeah. You don't have to guess what Jay Hernandez would say if you can, ask maybe Jay Hernandez.
And also, I think it's important for in the writer's room, and I noticed that on Empire and on Star, that there's for every character there is a voice in the room for that, because you have to have that. Because for instance on Empire, like if we know that Cookie and Lucius or whatever they did time. It's like you have to have someone that can speak to that. And how do you do that? Well, it can't be the guy that's, went to Harvard, and you know what I mean? It's got to be somebody that understands that point of view. And I think that comes from the showrunners. I think that they have to, like you said, you have to make them do better. You have to make them go out and find those people. And sometimes you said, like, those people are not in the same group of people that you may run, that are at your agency, that are at your management company. Those are the finds that are sending you stuff in the email that you're scared to open because if you have the same idea that they're going to sue you. Do you know what I mean? You have to take risk. But that's a real thing. People send you things unsolicited, and then all of a sudden you've stolen something from them. But you have to be mindful of how do you get those people into a room? How do you do that? You have to take chances, I guess. You have to take risks.
And then to add to that, and what you were saying of like, do they get promoted now? They cost the show money now because they're actually getting a salary that comes from the budget. I think there's a lack of mentoring that's happening. Mm-hmm. That like if you see somebody, it's like taking someone under your wing and like, because there's like writer's room talk, like there's words that not everybody, there's like a language that a lot of these old school guys use, and so if you're not up to that, I don't know, I just feel like there should be some mentoring going on to ensure that to teach that person, to lift that person up so that that they can be you're setting them up for success and you're really hearing their voice, like that it's not like a fake listening.
That term thing is right. I hear writers terms like, what does eggy mean? Do you know?
Eggy? I don't know.
Someone was like, yeah, that movie's good. The first scene was pretty eggy. And I was like, yeah, it was very eggy.
Like, I don't know. I've never heard that one.
You haven't?
But
But
maybe it just means like it was like mucky, like messy. It wasn't
it's related to
clean or
clammy.
something.
Like
Maybe
because
it's
it's
smelly.
clammy is it's
If
been
only
around
we
for
had
so long.
sweaty.
one white guy on stage, he could help us.
I mean, I remember my first time in a writer's room, somebody said, well, that's like a truck full of bananas.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Right.
like we can get a truck full of bananas, I guess, if you want one for the scene. I
Sounds
don't
great.
know why. Sure, I like potassium. We should get more bananas. Oh, no, that means that it's too much of a thing. You don't need a truck full, you need one banana. I get it. It's just learning.
Don't make me feel like a dum-dum. Say it's too much of a thing. You know, like they'll say like trickle cutter, and it's like, what? What do you mean? But,
What does that mean?
It's too sweet. It's too saccharine or something like that.
trickle
I think.
Okay.
I might be saying it wrong. I don't know. I just nodded and
I-
wrote down words and then went and looked them up after.
The first writer's room I was in was for the Carmichael show, and before I went in, my writer friends were like, "You're gonna be the
Which was
lowest
brilliant,
rung."
by the way.
It was such a great show, right? It's a great show. I was happy to be part of it. But you're going to be the lowest on the rung. You're going to be treated terribly. People are going to be like icing you out, boxing you out. So I like went in like ready, and because Gerard Carmichael worked really hard to have a room of people from all kinds of different backgrounds, people who was their first job, female showrunner. It could not have been a more welcoming experience. And I don't know. It was a lovely experience, and I think that's because Gerard worked really hard to make it that way, and I didn't have the experience that everyone had prepped me for, which is that I'm going to be like shouted down and kind of laughed at and not listened to for at least the first 6 months, and that was wonderful. And I don't know why. It's just an intentionality on the part of a creator and a showrunner to create an environment that's either going to help and lift people or just be this weird free-for-all that like feels like some Highlander contest that none of us signed up for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting thing to me is the ways in which Hollywood thinks that they're sort of like that Hollywood is somehow separate from the rules that govern literally every other human interaction in the corporate world. Like, if you go look at the Harvard Business Review, like there are countless studies that women perform better as hedge fund managers, as CEOs in terms of like ROI on the company, that diverse teams within your organization are always going to overperform versus teams that are sort of not diverse. Like, we have known this information for decades, if not longer, and somehow you have sort of leading members of the Hollywood community are like, yeah, but the creative process is different. And it's just ridiculous.
I totally agree with you because I just my own personal experience when I went to pitch to studios Blockers as the director, we had a script, we had a cast. I got the feeling that people were like, and it was a rated R studio comedy, which I think there is less than 10 women have ever in the history of film directed. And I got this feeling that they were like, can you do it? Like, can she actually do it? And I had like dozens of men around me. And it was just executives that I was pitching to, male executives that I was pitching to. But this gets back to the athlete mentality of like, are they capable?
Yeah.
We don't think they're capable. We're going to dismiss them immediately. And then you have to work so hard to prove that you actually have this ability, regardless of your gender.
But that's across the board too. That's across the board because I notice even in casting, when I'm casting a project, I'm the go-to black casting director if I'm looking for a black film or a black television show. But let it be something that's non-black. Can she really do that?
Can you evaluate white talent though?
Yeah, it's like, do you mean white or do you know what I mean? Like
Eggshell white?
Oh, you mean white?
You know, we kind of touched on this idea of particularly marketing as a major piece of this earlier, but we didn't talk about it in any depth. What do you think it's going to take for these kind of powers that be, that, you know, mystical they? Is it going to take this whole class of kind of complacent white dudes dying off for a sea change in the industry? You know, is there going to be
It's going to be Me Too. Bring them all down. Just kidding. Lots of really nice people.
They're going to cut the just kidding out.
Yeah, that'll be your quote for this.
No,
Hey,
no,
white dudes still run the earth, so I'd be careful.
Be careful.
We're in a safe room, right?
Everybody's friends. What do you think it's going to change? What it's going to take to change kind of these conversations, particularly about marketing, about how content is presented to audiences across the globe?
I mean, different powers that be. Or those powers that be just constantly losing over and over and over again because they don't get it. Like, I would hope that if you lose enough, if you're wrong enough, maybe you make different hypotheses.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
All right, we'll move on.
It's hard. I don't know how to get people to watch anything. I don't know how that happens. It seems very, very difficult. And again, I go back to the success of Black Panther, Crazy Rich Asians, Girls Trip. It's fantastic. But what if they weren't successful? That would hurt us. Would that hurt us?
It has hurt us, though.
No,
it
yes.
has. It is. There was a time when I think, and I'm trying to think of what movie it was because I can't think right off the bat, but I know that it was a Black movie and it was something that everybody anticipated being big, and it kind of hurt the Black movie business for a while. I'm not. Do you remember?
Here's the problem is that honestly, it's a sort of fundamental failure of people's understanding of mathematics more than it is race or anything else. Like, any one movie is not a referendum on every group associated with that movie, right? So, yes, Crazy Rich Asians might not. What if Crazy Rich Asians didn't do 160 million or whatever it's going to be at the end of this weekend? But guess what? Searching is crushing it at the box office on a budget of less than $1 million. If you look at the scope of all movies about people of color, one negative performance is not going to be countervailing evidence to all the evidence that suggests that they do just as well as movies of a lighter hue. Same thing with women, same thing with South Asians, East Asians, whatever. So it's like heaping all of this expectation onto a single film is irresponsible, not from a sort of like, ethics and moral perspective, but just from a like, you're bad at business if you do that. And so I think that like, I'm 100% willing to stand here and be like, you know what? Evaluate movies about people of color, evaluate movies about and by women on the aggregate reality of all movies in that scope, because guess what? I've looked at the numbers. They do really well. Big Mama's House 2 did 70 million foreign, which is crazy. But again, unless you're looking at the entire picture, you're bad at business. You're not just a bad person.
I think they're... I think to try to be positive, I actually do think they're learning. It's just a slow learning curve that they're having. It's just taking a long time to really figure it out. And to go back to like 2015 for women in comedies, 2015 had Pitch Perfect 2, which was like the highest grossing musical comedy of all time, almost $200 million, and then Trainwreck and Spy and what was the one with Sofia Vergara and Reese Witherspoon? It wasn't Super
Hot Pursuit.
What's that?
Hot Pursuit.
Hot Pursuit, and it was all four of those movies, and that movie made a lot of money, and it made a lot of movie internationally. Hot Pursuit, regardless of how it was reviewed. So in a 4-month period of time, in the summer of late spring and summer of 2015, there was massive success from women, and then 2016 there was like nothing.
Right.
And
We had our year.
2017 there was like,
Because we had our year.
Yeah, but you go like, hold on a second, like even just let's try to forget about gender for a second. Just look at the numbers, and it was like, why? And like, I get if you have to take 2016 to make the movie, then why isn't anything coming out 2017? And there wasn't anything in 2017 aside from Pitch 3, which was at the end of that year. But that was no risk for that movie, like why wasn't there more from women? And I think that it's like, I think a couple movies came out that didn't do as well, and they just changed the narrative back to they don't do good business.
It's confirmation bias.
That's exactly what it is. It's confirmation bias.
Oh, those are the exceptions that prove the rule. Oh, of course, like those did really well, but that's not the norm. Oh, these did badly. That's what we expected, so it's fine.
Whereas white movies aren't even evaluated as a group. They're not even. No. They're all evaluated.
I mean, 2017 was a great year for white movies. What I like is that there's this sense that if a movie does well, it does well in spite of having a person of color as the lead, which is why I like that Black Panther and Crazy Rich Asians are proclaiming what they are, and huge hits. We should have named our movie The Big Brown Sick. We would have made $100 million.
The Big Brown Sick?
Yeah.
That's what you came up with?
$100 million.
But I think the answer, the preferred answer to every question in Hollywood is no. right? Because it's way easier to say no than it is to say yes. And because yes, you have to defend at every step along the chain. If you say yes, you got to go to your boss. Why did you say yes? Well, I believe in it. Then to that guy, and keep defending the yes up and down the chain. No is easy because no is like, why did you not do it? Well, because one movie with a lady one time didn't make any money. It's cover. It gives them cover to say no and to be able to defend their decision to their boss by using shoddy math, which feels like it looks right on the surface, but does not at all tell the story.
And then let's not forget the they were talking about are become friends with like a lot of these big stars, and there's a whole network that's like I don't know how I would do. I don't think I would even have a good time if I was in that group of people, like going out or whatever. But they become buddies, right? They become buddies, and so when you look at like I remember I don't even remember who the actor was, but I remember being like at Hollywood and Highland or something and seeing like a massive billboard for somebody who had like 3 massive bombs. And this movie cost a ton of money. And I was like, just enraged. Why? Why am I made to look at that? And you realize, oh, because he's like best buddies with the head of whoever, you know? And like they keep getting these shots. So like that, like to go to a very difficult, you know, there's really no good answer to the question you asked of just like, how is this change gonna happen or whatever, other than, yeah, like do they die, or do we, you know, like is it, you know, as we start from the bottom and people rise up, you know, will change occur?
Yeah, I mean the good thing. I'm sorry, were you gonna?
No.
The good thing is they like to steal from each other, you know. Yeah. So if a movie with Asian people is a hit, they're like, well, we need our Asian movie that's gonna be a hit, you know. So you can use the lack of imagination against them.
So much of what we're talking about today is centered particularly on gender and race in terms of diversity, but that's not even getting into bigger questions about, you know, when are we going to see a superhero who is disabled? When are we going to see a fat woman in a rom-com? When are we going to get to see a movie that's really about America's working poor? What are those some of those kinds of stories that you guys would like to see? Any recent recommendations for stuff that might not be on people's radar, kind of in that sphere beyond the gender and race conversation?
There's a Valiant comic called Faith, which is about a plus-size superheroine. And it's phenomenal. It's fantastic. And in a world in which you can pretty much get any superhero thing made, why not? And in a world in which Melissa McCarthy is like one of the few remaining box office stars, why wouldn't you? You know, like lean into the things that you think you're good at, Hollywood, which is putting somebody in a box and doing a thing that it's easy to say yes to. Superheroes and that lady. Like, make that movie.
Yeah.
Wasn't there talk about Rebel Wilson maybe doing a Faith movie? Did I make that up?
I would watch the hell out of that.
That would be great. I'm
really
ready.
Cool. This is maybe a kind of a separate thing, but I've just been really impressed with the number of rom-coms as of late that depict healthy teenage sexuality, because I do think
like your movie
specifically, and like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I think I grew up, as a lot of us did, watching movies where boys were essentially stalking young women, and that we were taught that was so romantic, and I can't wait to get stalked, and it's going to be beautiful. And I wonder if, you know, so much of what's in the news now currently is and people do this when they're in high school, is a reaction to, like you were saying, that's the world that we were shown. The world I was shown in TV and movies is that I'm just this object. I'm not supposed to have a personality until a guy comes around and tells me to be a person. And
that's when you take the glasses off.
Finally, God,
and the
yeah,
ponytail
which I did
down.
earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm just been really, really excited to see a lot of rom-coms that are aimed at young people that show healthy sexuality, that is a two-way street, that is not predatory and not creepy, and it makes me feel better about the young people coming up, of what they're going to be like as adults. So that's a positive thing.
Yeah. I think there's a statistic that like over half of young people like in high school identify not as straight. Like somewhere, you know, it's very fluid, and the stuff, they don't care about the things that us old people care about. And so we start to tell stories from their perspective and their point of view, and they matter. Like I was excited to do that with Blockers, with the storyline and of one of the daughters being gay and being confused and all that kind of stuff. But I also think that because diversity with the LGBTQ community is like, it's really terrible. Like where in terms of both on television and in film, and yet our society is much more diverse in that way.
One real quick thing, my 75-year-old father who lives in North Carolina, after watching both Moonlight and Call Me By Your Name, was like, those movies were romantic. And what a lovely thing for like I think that was maybe his first sense of, he's an open-minded man, but that was his first sense of like the romance and that idea that neither of those movies were for my 75-year-old father in North Carolina, but he really got something out of them and kind of loved them. And why can't all of us? Like, it's good for both the community and for literally everyone.
Anybody else? Any other stories we're missing? Any recent recommendations of stuff that folks might have missed?
No. I was just going to say, I don't know that anybody would know this, but there's a new writer that my brother is mentoring. His name is Jordan Cooper, and he did a play called Ain't No Mo, and it was from, I guess, the Republic in New York, and they flew the players out here to do this reading, and it was about the plane. All the black people were on a plane in the entire world was flying to Africa, back to Africa, because Trump got elected again. And so it was the day that everybody was packing to leave. Wow. And it was and again, it's like, but that's fresh talent. That's something fresh and new but it was so funny. And Obama was the pilot. But you know what I mean? So that's what I'd like to see. I say all of that to say something like that we haven't seen, that it's just, fun and creative and new and, just other things.
I think that's actually the other thing, too, is that I would love to see more content that's about people in these communities that's not about being in these communities, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, one of the things I loved about Black Panther was like, there's a lot of blackness on screen, but it's a superhero movie at the end of the day. And that's the stuff that I like. Love, Simon is like, I guess it is an LGBTQ movie because it is a gay love story, but it's still a romantic comedy at the end of the day. Right. And I think the more we see of that, the better. Like where is the movie about a bunch of people with disabilities, and it's not about their disabilities. It's just like it's comedy.
Going to be a heist movie?
Yeah.
I would love to watch that heist movie.
That would be very cool.
That's a good idea.
No one suspects.
At New York,
but that's actually exactly why it works. That's amazing. Yeah.
Where's
We're
my
just
money?
giving you guys ideas for screenplays right now.
Pitch it. At New York Fashion Week, they had women models that were amputees, a woman who had lost both of her legs, and she had like these amazing prosthetic legs that looked, right? And then they had all different kinds of shapes and sizes. It's like they're they're not known for for models. It's been a learning curve for them too. Sorry, I'm not able to get this out. But the point is, they're changing, and they're representing change almost a little bit faster now than Hollywood is. And but I would like to see amputees and people with disabilities just being people. And showing that they're just having their relatable things that all of us human beings think and feel.
Yeah, I mean, Fashion Week was amazing. You had that Rihanna show also with pregnant models.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
And she was in labor, one of them.
Yeah.
And she gave birth right after.
But it's like you don't even think about it. It's like, how many fat women have you ever seen in sexy lingerie in an ad? Like, not very many. And then you see it and you're like, oh, how about that? Incredible.
And you make a ton of money.
Yeah.
You make all the money.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I'd like to kick one final question to everybody as we kind of wound down, and then I think we're going to take a couple of audience questions. What is the number one action item you each would like to assign to this mysterious they in terms of thinking about the future, in terms of the power we have of storytelling? What message would you like to send to the gatekeepers in Hollywood?
Spend a higher percentage of your time with people that don't look like you.
You're so right. I think just look outside of take risks. That's it. That's the simpler way to say it. Just take more risks, even ones that you think might not make sense to you. Take risks because it's good. It's good to do. It's good for your bottom line. It's good for everyone.
I think, sometimes, and you mentioned this, there's this sense that hiring diverse actors is diversity. I think it's just as important to hire storytellers and directors and crew members who are diverse, because I think that is what will ultimately lead to a better industry for everyone, because let's face it, our industry has had problems for decades and decades, and only now we're talking about some of these problems. So it's not just on-screen talent, it's everybody. The diversity initiatives need to apply to every job.
Yeah, I ditto what you've all said, and I think it's for the powers that be, when they're in a room full of different people that are underneath them, to listen to them, to ask them questions, to let them speak in a meeting. I pitched to a lot of executives that all looked like the same person, and then there was the one different person, and the one different person never spoke. And it's like giving them some power and getting to know them and mentoring them and asking them, the important questions, and stop being afraid. It's no longer a risk to tell relatable human stories to millions of people who feel the same way.
One of the things I loved about Black Panther, and I'm sure I will also love about Captain Marvel, is that Marvel has made these movies compulsory. Like, you have to see them. You have to see them all. If you're that person, you're going to watch every friggin' one they make. There were dudes who never would have gone to see a black superhero movie who went to go see Black Panther because they felt they had to. They didn't want to miss the episode of this massive TV show, so they're going to absolutely go and see Black Panther. So studios, when you have these giant friggin' things that you know people are going to see, if you're making a Fast and the Furious 7, Fast and the Furious 8, you're making another Marvel movie, maybe that director doesn't look like every other dude. Maybe some of the writers don't look like every other dude. Use these things that you know are going to be seen by a zillion people, that you are going to make anyway. F. Gary Gray can make one of those movies. Haddon Bowden can direct one of those movies. Ryan Coogler can make one of those movies. Absolutely. Like, use the big ship that you're going to send out to freight and stock it with people that normally don't get to sail.
I have nothing else clever to say. They've said it all. I agree with all of you.
I feel like we should have started on your end this time. I'm
I
sorry
agree
about
with everything. You're sitting up here thinking, I'm like, I have nothing. That's good. Yeah, you got it all.
Let's give it up for our brilliant panelists and all the wisdom they shared today.